Welcome back to JDM Legends, presented by Turn 14 Distribution, where today we deal with this hot mess right here. As you would have seen in the previous episode, we did give this car a very big cleanup, at least the paint. We did a big cut and polish on it. And then for fun, we grabbed Pete's BBS LMs out of his hoard to see how they would look on the car, because the wheels that were on here were just hideous, as were the high sidewall tires. And these do look much, much better. I mean, what doesn't look good on LMs? But they're not the right size. These are like an Evo fitment, so it's a square setup. And the wheel well gap. I mean, just look at the size of this wheel well gap. It is massive and uneven front to rear, so we really want to sort that out. So we have a set of coilovers we're going to put on the car now, and then we'll show you a set of wheels that will actually look proper on this car. We're going to fix that wheel well gap and, of course, improve ride quality and motion control and all that good stuff. The stuff you want out of a nice set of coilovers. We have gone with Fortunato. These are their 510 series, which feature their concave aggressive flow valving, which really has the benefit of giving you a really large range of adjustability. So these are 24-way adjustable for compression and rebound. Predominantly, you adjust rebound with this, compression less so. But the beauty of these is the way they're valved, you can change the spring rates out on them up to 8K from what they're spec'd for before you need to revalve them. Where with a typical like off-the-shelf coilover or damper, you could only change that by maybe 2K before you're going to run out of the ability to control that spring properly. So because of the valving that they build into these, you can make big changes to spring rate without having to send them back to Fortunato to get them revalved. 510s are meant to be like a street and track setup. They have their 500 series, which is more like full street, like I run on my Flexus, which ride amazing. These will ride a little bit firmer and will give you better body motion control at the racetrack because of that. So that's what we're going with. And as you can see, they test every single one of these setups on their in-house dyno. They give you a dyno graph with it so you can see exactly how they're behaving. They give you a certificate of assembly so you can see when it was built and what sort of valving profile they used, what spring rates they used. It's a very complete setup. We've run Fortunato on a ton of cars around here, as you guys know, and it just always works incredibly well. In the wheel well, it's reminiscent of the Flexus, isn't it, Pete? We've got this big upper A-arm, but it's quite low relative to the top mounting point, so I don't think we're gonna be able to just like take off the top nuts, pull the bottom bolt, and then pull this out, because it's gonna get caught on this A-arm. So I suspect what we're gonna have to do is pull these back bolts out and like move the A-arm out from the chassis to give us room to pull it out. Unlike Hondas, if you're used to Hondas, you know, the arm's up high and you can just sort of drop it out. But I think with this setup, we're not gonna be able to do that. So there is our Toyota Bilstein OE shock. I assume this is the OE shock and spring. I don't know for sure, but as you saw, we did remove this lower cup that holds the lower shock in there and also has the end link on it, and that gave me the room I needed to swing this out of here without disconnecting this upper control arm. So that was kind of handy actually. It wasn't a terrible job. So
pro tip.
Yeah, that's a decent tip for sure. So to set the ride height on the Fortunatos, what I like to do is take a measurement off the stock shock and spring. I'll generally measure from like the middle of the lower mounting point to say the top of the top hat. So 2 fixed points. I'll get an overall length measurement here. We'll call that 21.5 inches. And then I'll transfer that over here, but taking out, let's say 2 inches. I don't know that 2 inches shorter on this is going to mean a 2-inch drop on the suspension because of the way the suspension geometry works. So I'm really just taking a guess, but I want to take a guess and then set all 4 to that same guess so that we got the car at a nice level ride height, or at least close to it. You're always going to have to do some adjustment to the ride height afterward to get it just where you want it, but at least this gets us close. We're not having to make huge changes where we're like stuck making a million turns with the coilover on the car where it's a little more difficult. So I just find it's useful to set your heights off the car first, get you as close as you can to the right setup, and then you're doing just like fine tuning on the car. Okay, it's around 19 inches there. So what I decided on was taking 2.5 inches out. So I went from 21.5 length this down to 19 inches on this guy. So we'll see how that settles out for ride height, but that's what we're going for as our best guess. All right, the fortune's in there, and as you can see, the wheel looks like it's sitting much higher in the wheel well, as you'd expect when you're lowering a car, but it does leave us with some concerns about not having enough droop travel set into that. So for those of you who don't know what droop travel is or why you would want it, we're gonna go into that a little bit now. You can jump ahead if that's not of interest to you. And then frankly, if you're gonna be driving on perfectly smooth roads, you don't need a lot of droop travel anyway. But for guys like us who might wanna go to the racetrack or drive on these super rough Hamilton roads where droop travel really will improve ride quality and grip. I mean, droop will let the tire stay in contact with the ground more. So it is important for performance. So we're gonna go ahead and set all 4 corners up the way we've got it with this amount of droop travel, and then we're going to go and adjust the droop and show you how to do that and talk a little bit more about why that really matters. So in the rear, I'm gonna do the same thing, just take a measurement of the length of the stock shock here. Looks like it's 22 3/4. And I will take 2.5 inches off of that, which will take me down to 21 1/4. And that'll give me the length for the rear. That's, you know, lowering the front and the rear by the same 2.5 inches. I don't know if that's gonna be 2.5 inches of ride height or not. We'll find out the hard way. And that doesn't factor in any rake that the car may have. Got the lower bolt and the top nuts in, and as I release this, you can see there's basically no droop. Like, it came down 1/4 inch as I released the jack. So we just do not have much droop travel happening here. And we will address that, but let's get all 4 corners done, ride height set on the ground, and then we'll dial that in. Woo, well, I can tell you the car already looks 10 times cooler than it did before.
Looks like a floating spaceship here, DP.
And it looks so good. I love the hovercraft look, and you can see the wheel well gaps are quite even front to rear, so I think we're in a good ballpark there, but you can also see that there isn't a lot of visual droop happening. However, you can't always trust your ichrometer, so we're actually gonna show you how to measure droop right now. But before we do that, let's put this thing on the ground and take it all in.
Oh, she slammed! Oh my goodness!
She's tucking tire, buddy. She's tucking tire.
Wow.
Okay, so that's actually touching the fender. Not ideal. So my 2.5 inches was a 1/2 inch too much, or maybe an inch too much even. So if you're doing the same thing on your Supra, now you know. Don't shorten it by 2.5 inches, maybe shorten it by 1.5 inches as a starter. You can certainly see the front wheel well gap's gotten quite a bit bigger, so let's see if we guessed right on that ride height adjustment.
Oh man, that's pretty good, dude.
That looks nice. I mean, is that a realistic ride height for the mean streets of Hamilton? Probably not, but for a YouTube thumbnail, that's the hotness right there, everyone. So to measure droop travel, I'm gonna take a measurement from the bottom of the wheel to the top of the fender here. We'll call that 58 centimeters, or 580 mil. So we've got the front tires off the ground, retaking that measurement, trying to keep this nice and level. And we are now at 650 mil, which actually means we've got a lot of droop. We've got more droop than we thought. We've got 70 mil of droop. So we've got more than enough droop. So I had a 580 mil measurement on the ground, just like the front, and I now have 625. So that means I have 45 mil of droop travel, which is a little bit low actually. Most people recommend you want to say a minimum of 50 mil droop travel. So let's add some and we'll get closer to the front. Maybe we'll even get up to the same as the front, but I'd like to have at least 50 mil in the back. So let's show you how to adjust that now. So to add droop, I want to lengthen the shock by rotating the whole shock body in this lower mount up. So I'm making the length of the overall shock longer by 10 mil. So as you can see, I've lengthened the shock by 10 mil here. That's what that gap is. And now that's raised the ride height by 10 mil. I want to bring the spring down 10 mil, and that'll bring us back to the ride height we were at when we started. Just taking a measurement here to see I have moved this spring perch down by 10 mil, so we should have the same ride height as before, but with 10 mil more droop travel. However, you can see that we have no preload in the spring. And Fortunato does recommend basically having this snug, so they don't want any preload, they just want it snug. There's no downside to having the spring loose like this, because you're not often going to go into full droop. When the weight of the car's on the spring, it's not going to rattle around. And if you ever do go into full droop, it might rattle a little, but it doesn't cause any harm. So it's really just an annoyance. Boom, as if by magic, that worked. We now have almost 60 mil of droop travel. So we have added droop to over 50 mil, which is what we want. We're within 10 mil of the front. I'm much happier with that. And let's put it on the ground now and see if the ride height is where it should be. We were at 580 mil before, and we are at 580 now. So ride height hasn't changed. We've added droop travel. That is all win, other than the fact that we do have a spring rattle issue in full droop. So again, if that bothers you, put it in a tender spring or use a longer mainspring. There's ways to work around that if you're really trying to tune your droop travel. Honestly, I think what we're gonna do is put just zero out tension on that spring, take out a bit of the droop that we just showed you so that we don't have spring rattle, because we don't really need 60 mil of droop travel in the rear of this.
In terms of exterior modifications, we are not doing anything other than a front lip. I think the style of this car is really clean as is, especially now with it lowered. I think it looks super great. But it does really lack the front lip department. If you look at this, the factory one, I don't really like it because it starts off narrow and around the sides it like gets bigger. So it just doesn't have a cool profile, which is why I've turned to Shine Auto Project for their Type 1 lip. This is actually a rare, I think, Aero Magic replica, and there are some cheap ones out on the market and they don't fit well. Shine Auto has actually made some improvements to it to make it look pretty proper on this car, and they use their hybrid carbon technology, which means you can see this thing twists. I'm not going to twist it anymore. If you go on their website, they actually twist this thing quite a bit, but that means it's going to have a little bit of give, which is what you really want for a front lip. As you can see, there are more tools than you would usually need to remove a front lip, and that is because we have run into an issue, which is the studs here that hold the lip in place. This looks to be a common problem. The nuts are seized on them and do not want to come off, which has turned into a bit of a battle. Here's a quick, this is actually off the side, so there's only 4 on here that are stuck and kind of like spinning. But here's the way this lip is held on is this piece goes into the top of the bumper, and then this metal piece comes below and sandwiches it in place, which is actually a pretty clever design. However, as you can see, if the nut is too rusted on here, then what happens is this starts spinning and in its place, so now you can't really loosen it. With this top mounting piece off, I can now show you what I meant, and here it is. So you can see the stud that holds it in place is now rotating and continues to rotate to the point where you're just never gonna get it off unless you do what I did. And what we're gonna do is, you can see we have 1 of 4 left here, so I'm just gonna replace it with a proper nut and bolt through it, and luckily we can get at it, so it'll be kind of an easy fix. And that fit up quite well. I'm really digging the look of this thing, but let's get this car on the ground and see how it looks. It is just remarkable what a front lip lowering a proper set of wheels, a buff and polish will do to a vehicle, because this thing looks like a completely different car. I think the front lip added just enough of that like OEM plus look where someone may see it and think, oh, that's different than the factory one, but not really look at the car and be like, holy smokes, this thing's been so modified. Like, it's just, I think this car is just transformed so much. It's so cool. I would be willing to rock it as is. I mean, until you come up to the paint, when you're like 10 feet away, everything's great. You come up closer like we mentioned and it just does, you kind of look at it and go, Jesus. So anyways, I think at this point, let's see what this thing looks murdered out. We're gonna swap the wheels off of the red car onto here and see what those works look like. And we have hit another snag. Can you see this? This is a lock lug nut. And guess what? There is no socket in the car. I just texted the previous owner. He said the car, when he imported the car, it didn't have it. So he's actually never had these wheels off, which is a bummer. I did quickly search online, and the kind of internet hack thing is to put a 12-point socket, smash it on there, and you may be able to take it off. However, I just contacted Nam over at NV Auto, who always seems to have the answers. Nam provided me with a set of these lock extractor bits, and you can see there's two different types. This one here kind of like bites and twists off, and this one surprisingly is just like tapered in, but he said this is the one that works better. You just got to hammer it on. I can't use this one. This is the smallest one he's got, and as you can see, it's too big. So I'm gonna put this guy on here, hammer it on right now, and let's see how this goes. The key here is to have a straight shot at this and get it on there tight and proper. Here goes nothing. Okay, oh my goodness. I think it actually did it. Holy crap. Yes. Victory. Oh, that is such a savior. Look at that. And you can see I actually hammered it onto the back side of the socket rather than like the keyed part, and it worked remarkably well. So once again, Nam has never failed us.
Before I toss the wheel and tire on here, I did want to revisit the issue of droop travel and the fact that the spring has zero preload in it. I had a quick chat with Devin at Fortune Auto about it, and he does recommend having a 1/8 to 1/4 inch of preload in the front and the rear if you can, or you could even just like set it to basically like zero preload in the rear if you need to. So that's what we're going to do here. And it also occurred to me that because we set the car very low, really we've kind of set it like internet low, not really practical.
No, this is California low.
California low,
Yeah, that's
okay.
what I like to call it.
It's definitely not Hamilton low. So I think once we set it to a more realistic ride height, we will get, all these problems are going to go away. We will be able to put preload in the spring and have an appropriate amount of droop travel at the same time. Man, that changes the look of the car dramatically, doesn't
Holy
it?
smokes, yeah.
First of all, this is a 235, 265 staggered tire setup on a 18 by 8.5 front, 38 offset.
Yes.
18 by 9.5 rear,
38
offset, which is kind of like Supra spec, you could call it.
Yeah, this is more of the actual offset that you would run on Supras versus like the plus 20 is kind of like a dreamer's setup where you got to roll fenders and really do a lot of work to make it
I mean,
work.
that looks sick, but lots of fender work. This will clear the fenders as is, so this is more like an OE plus fitment that doesn't require you to butcher your fenders. And I think the profile of the tire, also front and rear, gives you like the appearance of more ride height or better wheel well clearance. So like I don't know, it just looks more Japanese tuner car to me on this setup than it did on the other stuff. I like it a lot. It's kind of got that Classics 90 vibe, like Wangang, high speed, highway.
Yeah, you're gonna see this thing like ripping by at 200 kilometers an hour, like 120 miles an hour.
This is the Supra Blackbird PT. You don't need Porsches in your life. You need a blacked out, murdered out Supra.
It looks good, man. I do like it.
I do think though that maybe the 18s look a hair small. I'm really tempted to see what the car would look like on 19s, and I think I got an idea for that. I mean, you knew I had to do it, and I have no regrets because that looks amazing. The center cap says Toyota, and as Dano from Augment Wheels just told me, that finally makes sense. These are, of course, the wheels off the Flexus, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, then you've missed out on one of the greatest build series ever on YouTube. Go and watch our Lexus LS430 build against Pete's M5 wagon conversion. We called it the 6K Sports Sedan Challenge. Neither of them are really sports sedans, but we had a ton of fun with those builds, and they both turned out mega cool, including these wheels, which are a 19-inch. So the fronts are 19 by 9 plus 30. The rears are a 19 by 10 plus 35. And they just happen to be pretty much the perfect spec on a Supra. I mean, the offset is pretty much on the money. They are 235, 265 staggered tire, which works really well on this car too. But it is a taller overall diameter tire, front and rear. So it's sitting a little higher on this side than the other side. But aesthetically, I think it looks super cool. Although maybe the 19s are a little big. What do you think, Pete?
I think they are just a tad big, especially because this is a bare car. I think if it had like the aero package on it, it would certainly fill out the center gap there in between the wheels. But
yes.
I like it. I do think they're just like, there's just something, you look at it, you're like, man, maybe it's just because we've been staring at 18s for so long, but I do think they're a little bit big. But you know, it's more of like that GT Cruiser.
Yes.
The car that you want to just like drive around in, you don't want to hoon.
Yeah.
This does kind of look perfect, right?
Yeah, my eye is kind of in between. I want like an 18.5-inch diameter wheel on this car, but man, I think the 19s or the 18s would both work well. It's just going to come down to your personal preference, and I think for us, we'll go back to the 18s for more of that like classic JDM look. All right, everyone, that is a wrap on this episode, but before we go, we wanted to ask you, which of these 3 wheel choices would you go with on your own Supra build? Personally, I'm maybe partial to the Flexus wheels just because, man, they just give me all the old school feels. But I do love the way the Works and the BBS LMs work on this car. They look extremely good too. So ultimately it's going to, 19 versus 18. That's just an aesthetics choice. I think both work well in the car. However, you will not be seeing any of these wheels on this car long term because we have actually ordered a different set of wheels, which we'll show you in a future episode that we think will blow your mind and will really set the tone for this whole OEM Plus build that we've got going on here. You won't see those for a little bit. In the next episode, however, you will see us start to spin some serious wrenches. So thanks again for watching, everyone, and we'll see you in the next one.
PT, are we going to address the elephant in the room here or what?
Oh, my ankle here. Well, I was doing some parkour jumping and I fell and hurt my ankle. So that's what I'm going with. But the true story is I was carrying my daughter, not looking where I was going, and I rolled my ankle really badly. So it's going to have this little brace for a little bit, guys.